Hey, I'm Jay Akonzo, and welcome to B2B Storytelling Stars, presented by Intuit Mailchimp. In this limited series, go behind the scenes as I work with 3 exceptional B2B marketers and leaders to develop their messaging and their signature stories. This is our 6th and final video in the series. 3 group calls and 3 one-on-ones, and you get access to it all. And if you missed any of that, go to jayakonzo.com/stars. And while you're there, you can find a free template to apply to your work to become a stronger storyteller associated with every single video. 6 videos, 6 templates. And all of this is free and ungated. In today's group call, something really special: each participant's signature story and a special guest. A signature story illuminates your premise. It's the illustrative example that you share when you're asked or when you're creating content. Crucially, a signature story isn't just the one that you tell on repeat everywhere you go. It's about the signature. Can you sign your name to the work? You and your brand, you have a perspective, you have creative fingerprints. Can you get that all over the work so it is undeniably your own? That's the power of a signature story in part. You're also able to show others what you mean when you make an assertion like your premise. Instead of tell them, you can show them. That's one calling card of an effective storyteller. As an author, a speaker, and a consultant myself, I have a whole bag of signature stories. I've developed them over the years through my writing, in my book, on my podcast, and crucially, I've learned that these stories are always built. As Ira Glass likes to say, great stories happen to those who can tell them. What he means is that you don't experience stories. You experience life, maybe your own, maybe others when you talk to them. And then you put your butt in the chair and you do the work to develop that material into stories. It's a craft. And today, we're putting part of the active crafting on display. So let's get into the shaping process as each participant and I work together to mold their stories into something great, because it is a creative act. It doesn't happen to you. You have to shape your stories to be useful. And here's a look, again, at our awesome participants in this series. Sarah Stockdale is the CEO and founder of Growclass, which provides courses and community for mid-career marketers. Shez Mehra is an entrepreneur and an expert in the field of sound, music, and sonic branding. And Natalie Taylor is the head of marketing at Capsule, a startup which sells video software to enterprise customers. And now our special guest, it's Megan Spellman, the director of brand experience at Mailchimp. Megan is one of the most accomplished and experienced individuals in the world of B2B brand, and she was kind enough to join us to offer her perspective on our participants' signature stories as well. All right, let's develop some stories from raw material and observations and drafts into signature stories. I just want to start by embracing that, like, doing meaningful things and telling meaningful stories is freaking hard. Like, I got it from all 3 of you in different ways, where, like, this is not, I'm going through my day and naturally this brilliant story just pops out and rolls off the tongue. And I remember there was another client of mine, and she actually appeared on my the recent episode of How Stories Happen, Susan Bowles. And Susan was like, I didn't realize that the people I admire creatively, they don't just show up and, like, start writing things and just poop gold, that you're, like, working on something and reworking it and reworking it. And it's like, it doesn't feel either natural or like it fits your day, you know? And so I just wanted to say, first of all, this is hard. If it felt hard, it's because it is. And second of all, I know the 3 of you are all, like, fitting it in and around the stuff you're already committing to. So I wanted to, like, express both empathy for what you're going through, because I don't think that feeling goes away. And I tell stories all the time. And also gratitude for you all going through it. So that's just how I wanted to start and get that out of the way.
It was not easy coming up
No,
with a signature
it's not.
story.
It's really not.
I'm just going to say that the framework has been super helpful, and kind of just looking through everything that I'm up to through that lens has brought a lot of clarity. So thank you, Jay. That's it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Honestly, it was born out of my own frustration working in-house for corporations, not being able to, like, pitch my ideas to other people. Like, when you pitch your ideas to other people, you can't just say, and this is I think the difficulty of us all being creatives, however you define it, we're so eager to share our ideas. But instead of sharing your ideas, you have to share why your idea should exist. And you have to then color it based on what they already want. Like, you have to meet them where they're at. And I was terrible at that. You know, a boss would want a lead generation goal for the month, or a new kind of message or positioning publicly. And instead of saying, hey boss, you know how that's our goal, or that's what you want, And you know how like, this is how we come at it. And then we run into these problems and it doesn't work so well. Well, like now here is my idea third, right? Later, because I'm placing it in that structure. So I assure you, this was me like banging my head against the wall for many years and many jobs and being like, why don't they see what I see? And then the humble pie you have to eat is like, oh, because I didn't do a good job of showing them what I see. Like that's what a story is supposed to do. So I appreciate that. And yeah, man, that hits me like where I live because I've just been through that.
I think the forcing function of telling someone else's story that wasn't
Sure.
like a kind of like larger, more marketing focused story that I've told before was an incredible forcing function. And then having the structure that you had for it outlined the more like journalistic questions that I came to the person, the subject of the story with, and gave me a framework for like figuring out what I actually wanted to draw out of that conversation.
That's so interesting. So two things on that. One, which is counterintuitive to a lot of marketers, I was taught you have to earn the right to talk about yourself. And so in a speech setting is an easy example. Instead of leading with a story about you and I did it and you can too, you know, you're talking about and to the audience and with the audience. And then you arrive at an illustrative story about somebody else. Maybe they're a client or a customer, maybe not, but you're not a part of that story. It's not a case study. It is them going through a period of transformation akin to what you want the audience to go through. And you do need some journalistic tendencies. Like the second thing I wanted to say is I got lunch with a friend of mine. I was giving a speech in California and I spent some time with a journalist friend of mine. And the questions he asked just me or the people around us made clear to everybody, oh, this person's a journalist. Because he was like trying to fill in the gaps of knowledge that he lacked to like understand things. And so, you know, I think of, you know, Shez, all the people you run into as somebody who's trusted in your space, whether they're a prospect or a partner or a peer. Sarah, your community at Growclass and all the interactions you have inside of that group. Or all your industry peers at events. Nat, I think about the content series that Capsule's building, or I think about the dinner series you've had with prospects and customers. Like, yes, you can just chit chat, but you can also be thinking like, is there a story here somewhere? And the questions you ask live and in a room somewhere or virtually can be conducive to you fleshing that out. You know, and another advantage you have is once you develop the premise, you can very much launch some kind of content series, a newsletter, a podcast, a video series, what have you, you know, writing articles and interviewing people where you're enrolling each individual to share something of their experience as it relates to your premise. You know, like a simple example would be if Sarah, you're all about community, you wouldn't talk about this individual and ask them questions as if they're a rogue genius who did it all alone. You would be asking them questions about who's around them, how that person or people helped them, and all those things, right? So you're able to sort of like to assume the posture of a storyteller is really important. It's not just the structure or the process that I gave you, because I gave that to you and you will mold it to your own way. It's also going to be dependent on how you now see the world and how you move through it and ask people questions. Cool. So let's set some intention for the call, and thank you for the reflection. What I want to do is basically just have you share the work you've come up with, share the stories, share the drafts, recognizing that it's still pretty messy and these are not it yet. And what we're not here to do is judge them and how good or bad they are, but to notice things about them. And then, so that's the role Megan and I will play, and we'll articulate what we've observed and give you a reason why we're pointing those things out and maybe some things to consider. And I'd encourage everybody else whose story is not being presented to do the same thing. All right. Is anyone like either super excited to or just want to get it out of the way to go first? Otherwise, I'll just pick. All right. Well, Nat, you made the mistake of submitting the story to me first.
Dang it.
So what would you say is Capsule's premise, at least to this point, like the version of it as you can articulate it right now?
Yeah. So the premise is, so we work with creatives and they are trying to do meaningful work that they're proud of, but are kind of stuck in these processes or kind of bottlenecked by the overwhelming demands that they have across their whole organization. And they have some good systems in place. They're trying to build processes to scale their brand, to scale their creative services, and be seen more as a partner versus just like a services arm within the company. These folks really care about their brand. They care about the creative function of their company and their organization. But the systems that they have in place just aren't working. They're usually just still kind of like underwater or just doing a bunch of rote tasks, and they're not able to fully empower the rest of the organization in a way that they feel good about, in kind of letting them run loose, or they just don't have the bandwidth to work on the projects that they are best suited, that they have the unique skills to work on, to really drive the brand forward and make the most impact. Right. And so our premise, or our assertion, is that we want these creative leaders to move away from more of like an individual contributor role, or a like task manager delegation role, into more of a conductor role, where they are orchestrating the entire creative output of the brand and able to balance all of the music and the harmonies and the sounds, so that it's all one cohesive story, brand, narrative experience that feels that they are managing. They're orchestrating that whole brand experience.
Right. And I feel like a part of your evolution in sharpening this premise overall, before we get to your story, is like looking at what they're already trying to do. You already mentioned a bunch of symptoms, right? Task management, maybe like team building and camaraderie to earn trust across departments or functions. All these things are trying to do. They're bringing good intentions to it, to remove the bottleneck, to elevate themselves, to work on the things that uniquely require them. The intentions are good, but you're like, what's missing is these things are focused on this, when what we have to get good at is focused on this. And the good news is you have the harder part. You're like, you have to get good at knowing how to orchestrate it all, knowing how to move between being creator and being a conductor, right? And here's what a conductor does. All those things become part of your IP that you can defend, right? Whether it's through copy or conversation or content. And so I'm an English major. If I don't alliterate 40 times a day, I don't get a return on my degree. So copy, content, conversation, you get it. And so like that's something I would look for beyond today, which is like they're doing a slew of things. I heard you rattle off the symptoms. What's the illness, right? Like an example would be, I'm not saying it's this just feels exciting because it's a little bit of a challenger idea. And all of those things are dedicated to doing one thing that you hear a lot about and maybe even think you should do, which is you're trying to democratize video. Yeah, but here's the thing. You're still like the leader of that democracy. You're still like understand like how democracy works here. You're like, it's not just democratizing doesn't mean let it all run wild, right? Like, and maybe even me saying democratize video makes you a little queasy because you're like, I don't know. I've worked for 25 years to get good at this and I have a long way to go yet. I'm going to expect them with all these other cares and they don't care for what I care about and they don't know what I know and can't do what I do to just suddenly do it. I don't know. Like, so again, I'm not saying it's that, but you're like, you're doing this with good intention. I'm not saying you're wrong, prospect, audience, head of creative. All of that is you trying to achieve this. What we believe is that you should try to achieve this. Like, it's like but actually it goes deeper than even that, right? It's really your ability to be a conductor.
And if you don't mind tacking on to the conductor piece, I think it would be helpful to kind of extend that as well, because what are the benefits of being a conductor and kind of showing those? And so we're saying moving from this to this, why is this better? Being a conductor is better because then you can do XYZ that you haven't been doing, or you can expand your brand. And that way, right. Just providing a little more like, oh, I want to get to a conductor place. Like that sounds better for these reasons.
I think for creatives, the they want to be involved, right? They want to be part of it. They don't want to be the task manager. They don't want to be the leader. They want to be like on the team doing something. But if you are running a marketing team, you don't always get to be part of the practice, but in this way you get to be part of the performance. There's like, I'm doing your alliteration J thing.
That's a useful handle that becomes like a signature bit as part of your IP and your positioning potentially at Capsule, which is, say that again, Sarah. That was beautiful.
You don't always get to be part of the practice, but you want to be at the performance.
Yeah. You know, you don't, and ways to play with that, like the practice versus performance. Like you might not be in the execution of it all, but you definitely want to influence the performance. Like you're not in the practice, but you're influencing the performance. That's a genius little handhold. It's a little window into Nat and Capsule's worldview. The first story we'll hear is Natalie's. Now, I gave all of our participants permission to basically make a mess. This is early. This is raw. What we need is the best possible set of ingredients on the table before we can cook it into a delicious dish, because this is crafted carefully. It doesn't just come out fully formed. In this case, Nat is developing a story to illustrate Capsule's premise. The premise that we've been working on in this series sounds something like this. If you're an enterprise head of creative, you work for a big brand and you're the head of their creative, maybe the head of their video, the idea that you would democratize creativity through technology makes you a little uneasy, but you do want to remove the bottleneck of requests that's holding you back from doing the work that uniquely requires you. And so what can you do but delegate and democratize? Well, the thing is, you got into this line of work to ensure that more beautiful things get created. You identify as a creator. So the key, if you're trying to remove that bottleneck problem and do better creative work, is not to just democratize it all and give it away. The key is to know how to move between being a creator and being a conductor. Conductors don't just give up the performance, they have a role to play. But you have to learn, as the head of creative at an enterprise brand, how to create and how to conduct. We're Capsule. We assert that you need to become a better conductor, and we have tools to do so and content to teach you, etc. So that's a bit of Natalie's premise, or at least my version of it, ahead of this signature story. Let's hear what she came up with.
Matt Reschke is a pizza chef who's been crafting gorgeous homemade Neapolitan pizzas in his backyard for his friends and family for 10 years. He hosted intimate backyard pizza parties almost every week, and he loved perfecting his recipes and sharing new seasonal pizza with his guests. Really, what he loved most about pizza nights was how it gave him an opportunity to both create something beautiful and be a host. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never get through his list of people to invite over for pizza. By the way, this is the same. I'm in the same boat. We do the same thing. Can never get through a list of people to invite for pizza. It was either keep feeling like he would never reach all the people he wanted to, or try to scale it by opening a pizza restaurant. So most restaurants are set up as kind of high volume, high speed, non-local commodity types of operations. But at home, Matt liked to craft at his own pace, very carefully, thoughtfully, with the highest quality. And he liked to talk with guests while he did it. So it was a very slow pace. So how could Matt take this intimate experience of being in his backyard with carefully, thoughtfully crafted pizza and being an attentive host and scale that into a restaurant setting? In other words, how does he take his beautiful vision of pizza and community and scale it to more people without losing the part that makes it his? Matt needed to stop controlling every aspect of pizza night and focus on the things that he was best suited to do and wanted to do, which is bringing his vision of pizza and community building to his entire community. So he surrounded himself with the people he needed to keep himself as host, visionary, and conductor. He trained staff, hired a chef, partnered with local farmers, and he started to build systems and processes so he could pull himself out of the weeds and make sure the whole vision of the restaurant was reflecting his backyard experience. I pulled this from Jay that he wrote in an email exchange earlier because I loved it so much. After all, what do any of us creatives really want in the end? Why are we drawn to this work? We want to bring more beautiful design into this world, gorgeous videos, powerful stories, delightful illustrations, inspiring words, memorable moments, delicious food. We are in the business of beauty, not just so others can stare at something we create without end, but so we can stir hearts, engage minds, and spark action. Now, Matt doesn't completely step out of the day-to-day or actual pizza making. When they're short-staffed, he's running the oven, other examples of things he does when he jumps in. But because he's built the culture and the systems of the restaurant, his vision can continue and he can still operate as the overall visionary and conductor. That's the thing about being a creative leader or visionary. In order to allow more people to experience the beauty that you have created, in other words, to scale up your creativity, you have to let go of some control. You have to become more like a restaurant owner and less like an individual line cook, more like a conductor and less like an individual musician. And you have to know when to move between the two roles in order to support the broader vision. No bridge here, but we're Capsule and we help creatives scale their vision and move into a conductor role.
I mean, that's snaps and claps for that. Thank you for kicking us off here. The prompt I gave everybody was make a mess, like slap down what feels right in that right order, make a mess, right? It's easier to do that, get out of your head and onto the page, and then get into cleanup mode once the raw clay is actually down, you start to shape it, right? And I think like you have, well, let's change metaphors from clay to dough here because it just makes sense. You have some really good dough on the table. One of the things that I feel like you did exceptionally well was map the beats, which is really important because it makes the rest of the wordsmithing, vivid imagery, forward action, tension, all those things just sort of easier now to focus on because you're not worried about the flow resembling what your audience is going through. So I want to make two observations really quick and then open it up to others and what they noticed. So the first thing that I noticed was Matt begins in this story as, let's use the business analogy here. Matt begins as either, his analogy would be the head of creative, but also the person doing all the creative at a startup, not at an enterprise brand, or the soloist before they join the enterprise brand. In other words, Matt is doing it at home, doing it as a hobby, doing it for fun, then trying to scale, then launching the restaurant, etc. You've been very clear throughout our process that, and this is the reason I brought this up, that you are appealing to these enterprise leaders of whom you're not a part of that tribe, right? It's not your job. It's not your past. And what they're going through needs to be something that becomes clear that Capsule understands, right? So I wonder if there's a way to start the story or at least advance the action a little faster so that when you get to the central tension, when you get to the agitate section, the source of the frustration is not bringing on other people and delegating and scaling around Matt, but that Matt has already started to do that and deal with that because that's what your head of creative is going through at an enterprise and is struggling or trying things that feel like the best practices, but they're not working. And then the central switch Matt makes is, okay, I have failed to realize here that I'm now the head of this orchestra. And so I need to get good at the conductor part and what that entails.
Yep.
So it's almost like the tension here was what most human beings, what most normies would face, which is I did it for many years. It's sort of the classic American entrepreneur story, right? I did it alone. I'm good at it. It's my thing. How do I scale this into a business? What your audience uniquely goes through is they're already at scale. And so you kind of have to plant the protagonist there and have them face the problems that feel similar to your audience.
Yep.
Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. And I totally agree. And I think that is like knowing Matt's story, that is the central tension. And and to be clear, he's still facing this tension. He's not good at systems and processes. He's like still struggling with some of this stuff. And so I think that is the main tension and that aligns a lot better with,
And this is, again, the posture of a storyteller, the ability to ask piercing questions with generosity and not like in an attack mode to people that are just people in your lives. What is one central moment, one illustrative example in Matt's life today or recently where it feels like, you know, like I'm thinking of, you could look back someday and be like, oh yeah, the sauce fiasco. And Matt would talk to you about a moment where he's like, I was running so fast. I had a million things to do. I hired this team. We have real revenue. Like, this is a business going places at scale. And then this happened. And what he does is not being a conductor, right? Or what happened made him realize, I got to start being a conductor. You know, that's a problem native to somebody operating at scale. And there's ways to do this that don't involve you asking him questions like that. Although I think that's one very effective way, is like the note here is get more specific. Like one central moment described vividly reveals the universal better than just the description. So like show, don't tell.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, again, similar to what I said earlier, but kind of pointing out what Matt is losing by not moving forward in this way and what he would be gaining if he was. And Jay, I think about you and your personal example of, you know, if you are hiring people around you, kind of reminding yourself to anchor as, why did I decide to move from a soloist to a firm? You know, I had a goal in the beginning, and how is this meeting my goal or not meeting my goal if I've made that decision to scale? So same thing with Matt. If he wants to scale, kind of anchoring himself back in, what was the goal? What is the reason I did this? And then what are those benefits of doing that? And what is he losing by not?
Yeah. Nat, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I'm curious, and no need if there's nothing on your minds, but I want to open it up to Sarah and Shez too, just in case. But just to give you the floor, Nat, any thoughts, questions, comments on the stuff Megan and I shared?
Yeah, this is great. I love the idea of starting this later, like we talked about. I love making it clear what Matt is gaining or losing by moving forward in this way. I mean, his goal is to reach everyone and more on his list. Like, he just wants to share this craft and this beautiful experience, like the whole experience, not just like literally the pizza, but the whole brand creative expression with as many people in his community as possible, and change his community, like change, you know, bring his community together and really, you know, make people feel something. Yeah. And I think that parallel is, and he, in order to do that at a bigger scale, he has to put these processes in place. He has to give up some control. He does need to, you know, train people in certain ways, and by doing that, he can reach more people.
I think that's it. You got to make me feel what Matt feels a little more. And that's when you get really specific, and you can bookend it very nicely. So like at the beginning, when he's just Matt making pizza, or even Matt making pizza with a small team, because he's still somewhat close to it. What's he love that is so tiny and so craft driven, practice driven, that he would lose, that's hard to give up, almost like you'd go through a period of mourning if you no longer did that. Like Matt loves, you ever make pizza and you get all that flour? What's the first thing all of us do when we get flour on our fingers? We go to the sink, we do that little move, right? So we're making the food, we're doing the move. We're making the food, we're doing the move. Matt loves the feel of flour on his fingers, right? Matt loves when you pull the pizza out of the oven, that crackle of the bubbles and the crust. Like, that's what got him into this. That's what he fell in love with, right? That's now a source of tension later for him struggling to be a conductor. And you, whether or not you say this overtly or you allow it to remain implied, listen, you're a head of a creative, of a giant department at a big brand. Like, maybe you don't fall in love with flour on your finger, but what's that tactile thing that you got into this work to pursue? And that's getting further and further from your view, right? And how do we counteract that? You know, and maybe you have a methodology for how to be a conductor, and it bakes that in, bakes that into the method is, right? I know, Sarah got it. It bakes that into the method, like, okay, this is how we recommend you be a conductor. It's not to just say, tough, you can't feel the flour, you can't feel tactile, right? It's to whatever. Do a review of the work with your team once a quarter, just to celebrate the minutia, right? Get your dopamine hits from the success of other people, something more specific and better than those examples. So that's an example of, you get specific, and it doesn't just bring the story details to life. It brings what the audience is going through to life, because they fill in their own version.
So great story. I think, loss aversion bias is a real thing. So I think just, again, pulling on that string of like, what have they been losing without even realizing it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think gains are important too, but again, just human nature. No one wants to lose out on stuff. So just tugging on that a bit more, people, the listeners and the audience will kind of frame that and digest that. Yeah. See that, Jay? They'll digest that however makes sense for them. So I think just like, prodding people a little bit more as to what they're actually losing out, again, without realizing it. There is this loss aversion here. No one wants that. And then when you do bring in that here is what there is to gain, maybe that'll be better received as well.
I think there's also a way that you could take that loss and show them the actual loss they're currently experiencing. So if they have this fear of losing creative control, of not being in the weeds anymore, not being useful or valuable to the creative process, what does that then do to the creative process when there's leaders who are that involved? Have you been in a situation where you've had a leader who's wanted to be involved but hadn't had the bandwidth to be involved? How does that feel? What are they potentially enabling or disabling by continuing their current behavior? So there's like the fear of the loss of the thing, the creativity that you can give them back as part of the story. But then there's also like, you're also doing a thing that maybe you don't want to do, that maybe is creating a different kind of loss that you're not acknowledging.
I think the only other thing is like just how this wraps up. Like, does it transition into capsules? Like, it has to transition into capsules somehow. I just don't know, like, what that bridge. I mean, I don't need to figure out the exact bridge, but like, I don't know how to end this.
Right. One of my favorite examples is with a client of mine named Michelle Warner, who sells, business modeling services. Like, she helps entrepreneurs design their businesses and marry the right marketing strategy to win clients. When she articulates her invite section, which, by the way, is the section most customized to what you're doing today, right? Maybe it's the trailer for your podcast, so you're inviting them to subscribe to the podcast, et cetera, right? But if it's just sort of like about you, what she does is I'm Michelle Warner, and I design business models built to last and the marketing strategies to fund them. And then, so like 1 or 2 lines quickly about what you do, like what is on offer? Who are you? What do you offer, right? We're Capsule. We're a video editor for enterprise heads of creative and heads of video, allowing you to X, Y, and Z. And then you recolor it with snippets of the premise to end, right? So with Michelle, she'd go, her premise is sequence over strategy. Knowing the next right thing to do is more important to an entrepreneur than knowing all the right things to do, like in a theoretical playbook sense, right? That's her assertion. And she can defend it, and others would disagree or strongly agree. That's what makes it effective. And so she would say, I'm Michelle Warner. I do this through these means, boot camps, client consulting, etc. Subscribe to my work or follow along as we rethink the best way for an entrepreneur to build a business. You don't need a pristine playbook. You don't need to follow the gurus or the trends. You need to know the next right thing. Stop looking for all the right answers. Do the next right action in front of you. Think sequence over strategy. So she just revisits some of the most powerful little pithy bites that describe her premise and then lands on the premise once again, like restating it. So you would do something similar where we're Capsule, we do this, and this is how. And people go, oh, interesting, but it kind of rhymes with other competitors. That's fine. We're all the same way, right? Like all of our whats or hows, it's kind of similar to our competitors, but the lens then comes back at the end. And the reason we do that is, we don't believe in this, that, or the other thing. We don't think you got into this to be a project manager. You got into this to be a creative, to do this, that, or the other thing. And that's why we're saying not to give up control, not to allow others to run wild, but to become more than a creator, but also a conductor, right? Like however you would articulate that messy draft. So that's how you stick the landing in this like document. As for when you go out to the real world, it's dependent on what you're there to talk about that day, right? Maybe it is your dinner series. Maybe it is the content series evolved out of that dinner series or what have you. That's where the call to action, or if you're Sarah Stockdale, the whisper to action gets a little bit more like customized.
Love that. Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The next story we develop is from Shez Mehra. Shez likes to say that when you close your eyes, the world's brands disappear, unless you understand the power of sound and music to develop your brand and brand experiences. He believes that while a lot of marketers and marketing leaders today believe in the power of experiences, they're really not thinking about, or at least thinking strategically about, sound. But that is what cements the memory of that experience in people's minds. So if you want stronger and more frequent brand recall, you really ought to move sound and music from an afterthought to the forefront. It has to be a major part of the process. He can defend that assertion. He can use his years of experience and expertise to teach you something about that process. And now imagine if he also told powerful stories about the same thing. So he's not just telling you, but he's showing you. So let's develop Shez's signature story to match his expertise. Just tell it as it is, like recognizing that, this was something you pulled together last night.
Yeah, like this morning. So I'm not going to read
right?
it. I'm just going to tell it. And so true story, I have a dear friend, Peter Monroe, and his father, Jim, was unfortunately diagnosed with really bad brain cancer. And despite having an incredible medical team, working through this with him, and they tried a number of things, the cancer persisted and really just continued to spread, so much so that he had 7 or 8 tumors in his brain. And a dad and a gentleman who had a lust for a life was reduced to almost this vegetable state where he didn't know what year it was. He didn't know who he was speaking with his own family. He could barely lift his head for a sip of water. And so, Pete and his family and the medical team are trying all these different things to try and make Pete's dad have somewhat of a peaceful exit, or revive him or jog him so that he could have some closure with his family. And unfortunately, his state continued to deteriorate, and the prognosis was really grim. He basically was told that your father has a week to live and make peace with that. And so Pete is sitting there one day in a small hospital room with his dad, trying to break through and have some sort of connection with this man before he leaves. And sort of as a last resort, and not even as a last resort, but more so just a way to calm the energy in the room, Pete starts streaming Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits, his dad's favorite band. And at first, his father's toes start to move or dance under the sheets. And then, as though he's possessed, he breaks down and starts bawling and recites every word verbatim to an entire Greatest Hits album, and ends up coming back to and gets to go home, and they spend Christmas together, and he lives another 8 months, and the doctors are amazed and surprised, and Pete gets to have all of this closure with his father. And Pete wrote a letter thanking Simon and Garfunkel for the genius of their music, bringing his father back to life. And I think we often forget about how powerful this stuff is, and how our brains are hardwired to receive these signals of sound and musicality. And I haven't gotten to the invite part, but the point is, like, can we take this and apply it to our practice as brand builders, as storytellers, as those looking to forge deep, visceral, emotional connections with human beings, which we hope to then compel them enough to part ways with their dollars to spend with our brand? The point is, like, look, sound and music can be so powerful, and this is what happened in this case. The other version of the story, as you can see on that sheet, is like more business focused. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm wrestling with which, and maybe I have a couple of stories in my back pocket, to your point, Jay, depending on the context and the audience and those things as well.
Yeah, geez, what a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. I always feel like such a responsibility when I have people close to me featured in my stories, to like do right by them, to respect what they went through, to even modulate my voice and my delivery if I'm speaking it out, to match the emotion of it, which, by the way, is something that I think we can all master, whether we show up through audio or video or live, which is, we carry the emotion. I was taught really early on, both as a speaker and a podcaster, if you want your audience to feel a certain emotion, you have to reflect that emotion to them. If you feel bored, they're going to seem bored, your guest or your audience, right? If you have a somber point you're making, you have to appear as somber for them to, further feel that emotion. So I thought you did that well, even as just sitting down talking to us on a virtual call. So thank you for sharing that story. first of all, I think it's a wonderful start. And I think now the work likely becomes, as you pointed out a little bit, tying it back to the world of the audience you're speaking to, because it is a metaphorical story above all else. And what I was struck by was two things. So first, just a fun throwaway thing that you may choose to incorporate to further the point or not. Are you familiar with the story of Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices? He voiced Bugs Bunny and lots of Looney Tunes and lots more cartoons that many of us grew up with.
I know who he is, but I don't know the story. So
so I'm going to butcher the story, but I'll give it to you briefly, and I'll link to, there was a brilliant Radio Lab episode which floored me in the best way about this story. So Mel Blanc was in a car crash, and in the hospital, he was largely unresponsive. And, they tried everything, and they were shifting towards palliative care, and, there was not much hope left. And the story goes that it seems like the voice of Bugs Bunny saved his life, because the doctors walk in and, they try to talk to Mel and no response. They try to talk to him. How's it going? How's the day? How you feeling? Doing any better? No response. And then one day someone walks into the room and says, "What's up, doc?" And he responds in Bugs Bunny's voice. And throughout the story, which gives me chills even just trying to do a butchered version today, he starts chiming in when asked and prompted as all these voices, which eventually brings him all the way back. So I thought of that story when I heard this one, and it tied to one insight about your platform, knowing it as I do now, Shez, which is like, these are wonderful, powerful, emotional stories. I got to go to work tomorrow and do my job as a CMO or as a marketer, right? And what you're saying is like, listen, in Mel's case, these are not just any voices, like a silly voice with somebody, right? This is his life's labor of love. In your friend's dad's case, it's not just any music. It's his favorite band. And behind all these voices of these cartoon characters and his favorite band and songs are all of these memories, which are parts of our identity. So it's not that like, play music, they might come back and be a little more alert. It's that you're allowing the person to tap into and access and even kind of embody today who they were, what they felt when they were going through an experience back then. It's almost like you have to give your audience of marketers, Shez, a hard truth, which is like, we work so hard for these experiences. You know what happens after they're done? They're done. There was a moment where your audience was focused on your brand. That moment is gone. How can they reaccess that on demand whenever to feel how they felt, that positive sentiment towards your brand, that thought they had of like, these guys are great, whatever? Sound is how we access it. And look, this isn't just me saying this. This happened with Jim's dad. This happened with Mel Blanc. It's not just sound does the work of whatever, making your toes twitch. It's that it allows you to access and even embody a version of who you were and what you felt, because sound more than anything taps into your identity and what you went through in an experience that you're no longer a part of. So if you're telling me you're really, really focused on experiences, so you become remembered, I am telling you, you're not incorporating the thing that creates and helps them recall those memories.
Right. That's great. And another thought as you were speaking, I just had is like, in building trust, which is another thing all of these brands hope to do, right? Because through trust fosters so many other things. We all trust the sound of our mother's voice. And we have since we were newborns to toddlers to kids. And so when brands run around doing all these tactical things and keep changing their tone of voice, not just in how they are written about or the spots they're making, but if there's no cohesion, no sonic cohesion to that, you're eroding trust without ever really giving yourself the chance to build it. So how can we make brands more motherly in a way where that voice, that sound, that sonic personification of what the brand stands for is just constant and cohesive throughout, right?
Any other observations from Shez's story? Why don't we get one more and then we'll move to Sarah's for runtime here.
I was just quickly going to add, I love that idea of just, again, humanizing brands and and making people feel, Shez, like you said, attached to them on such a deeper level. And in your premise, I loved the line where you talked about sound being the first sense that develops in the womb. I audibly was like, oh, I was immediately like attached to this idea. I've never thought about that. I've never heard about that. Now I'm going to think about it all the time, every time I hear something, So I love how you've humanized brands too, and that this can be such a key piece of being an important part of people's lives, stories, histories. So I think that's just a really beautiful piece to think about.
I think there could be some more parallel or tension leading up to his friend deciding to play the music, or like the parallel of it was an afterthought. But then it ended up being this like super powerful thing that maybe there's some sort of parallel of like, it tends to be an afterthought, but when you use it correctly, it's transformative. And so that can be a similar journey.
That's genius, because if you trace the beats of the premise, that's what goes on in Shez's premise, right? It's like, it's not that you aren't incorporating sound, sonic branding, music, etc. It's that it's an afterthought, and it's like the sprinkle on top. And Shez's whole premise is like, it's got to be the main thing. It's the cake. It's the frosting. It's not like a little topping at the end. I love that. Next up, a signature story from Sarah Stockdale. Her company Growclass runs courses for mid-career marketers, but also crucially, and probably even more important than the courses in Sarah's mind, they offer community, because Sarah asserts, as does her team, that the story of the lone genius, the roguish hard worker who puts their head down and powers through to success, yeah, that's a myth. That's a lie. And so to combat that lie, you have to embrace success happens with and through other people. We need each other. It's how it always happens. It's about community. So if I ask Sarah for the perfect story to illuminate and illustrate that premise, what might she say? Let's develop her signature story.
So you go to university, you pay $40,000 to $100,000 depending on where you live to get a degree. You work really hard, you get A's. You go to work, you work hard at your job, you're seen working hard. You come in early, in before your boss, and you leave after them. You actually do work really hard. You were promised that it would all pay off. You learn about negotiation, you advocate for yourself at work, but it's never the right time for a promotion. It's not you, it's the timing. So you're patient, you take courses, you try to post on LinkedIn and build your personal brand, but it never feels like it's going anywhere. Then you get to 29 and you're doing the thing that you were promised would make you successful, but the payoff still seems so far away. Your boss expects an overwhelming amount of expertise, skills, and work from you, while also low-key warning you that AI is going to take your job any day now. The hustle, the early morning green juice, the journals, the constant self-improvement, you feel like you're two again, holding this construction paper of gold stars in your clenched fists, holding it up to capitalism, and no one is clapping. You were promised this would make you successful, but you don't feel successful. You feel tired. It's not working because it was always a lie. That lie is where I found Suma. Suma joined the Growclass community in 2021. Like most smart folks, she was skeptical about joining yet another community, but someone she trusts told her to just try. She'd been working in content marketing at the same job for a couple of years, and she was the workhorse. She was in early. She was leaving late. She was wearing 1,000 hats. She was leading a very scrappy, very funded and overworked team. She was patiently waiting for a promotion she'd been promised for almost a year. She was so burnt out that she was fantasizing about becoming a dog walker. She doesn't even really like dogs. Then it finally happened. Not for her, though. She didn't get the promotion. They brought in someone external to do the elevated role, and of course, they asked her to train him. She was the workhorse, and they brought in a show horse. It was then she'd realized she'd been lied to. She was told the work would pay off, but there she was, watching someone who hadn't done the work get the payoff. The facade fell. She wasn't getting the promotion because they'd never take the workhorse away from the work. But still, she stayed. This is where it gets messy because I haven't finished it, but basically what she told me is that, and I don't want to promote Growclass in this, but she found a group of people, happened to be through our community, but I don't have to say that because I don't want to be selling from the stage. But she started talking to folks in a mastermind about this experience that she was having, and she realized that this was an experience that everyone was having, and there were people, part of that group, who had left that experience, who had stopped being good little soldiers and who had decided to do their career a different way. And she said, you can ignore one person, you can ignore a mentor, you can ignore a friend who tells you that the thing you've been promised would work won't work. But when there's a chorus of people who are telling you, I tried it and it didn't work and you have to stop. She said I had to like have the mirror held up for me to realize that I couldn't get where I was going this way.
It's a good setup. No, I appreciate that. And you brought a sense of drama early, right? So we can finish it off with the, what happened next and the so what, the insights that you rip out of it for people, which is stuff that all of us as marketers and experts and teachers do. That's the more natural part, right? Is to say the stuff we normally say, colored in a better, brighter fashion. So it's more potent and powerful. So there's a couple things in there. First of all, and I mentioned, and I wanted to point out, the sense of sort of drama comes from the tension that Suma's feeling and also the forward action. And what I was reminded of was a quote from the creative nonfiction author, often telling autobiographical stories, David Sedaris, when he was asked, are your stories true? Because he's an autobiographical yet creative nonfiction writer. He's not a reporter or sharing a transcript of his life beat for beat. And he goes, yes, they're true. True enough for you. And so this is how we navigate details that we're not sure serve the story, or more to the point, serve the audience. You don't invent, you don't fabricate, but you're recalling and pressing it through a lens, and also like compressing it to a runtime. Like, how do you take a lifetime and put it to a runtime? You have to make certain trade-offs and choices. So I have certain guardrails and goalposts for that. One thing I never do is put words in people's mouths. I never say that they felt a certain way unless there was strong signal that they did. Otherwise, I say I'm assuming they did. But I will manipulate the story in service of the insight and where I want to land it. A quick example. One of my signature stories involves the time I left Google. And I use it to teach any number of things, because over time you tell these stories enough, you're like, oh, I can massage it this way to land in this insight. But then later, to a different audience or for a different purpose, I can take you back to these moments instead and land on this second insight instead. I know the seminal moment of the story was when I showed something on my laptop to my 3 roommates, and I showed it to them one by one in different rooms of my apartment. And so for the speed of the story and the power of it, I put them all in one place, right? Like, that's fine. Do that kind of thing. So Growclass, take Growclass out at this point in the story, unless it's a case study for Growclass and that's how you're using it, and say, like, you said she found a group. I want names. And that's where she first heard from Sam. And Sam said, I did it that way. It didn't work for me. You got to stop. And you could ignore one person. But then she heard from Megan. And Megan was like, I did it that way. And you got to stop. It doesn't work. Whatever. Megan's always saying stuff like that. And then she bumped into Jay, right? Like, so make it much more specific and bring out, I think in your case, names as your version of me putting my roommates in one place, right? So is the story true? Yes, true enough for you. For the purpose of the story, it's not fabricated. It's not a lie. It's you recounting it and trying to arrive somewhere to teach. And so when people start hearing your brand name, objections enter their brain, and you got to clear away the head trash just to get back on track, right? So that's an easy way to try and avoid that.
She's a director at a venture capital fund now. Like, she's crushing it.
Yeah.
But because someone made her like go for a coffee.
Yeah.
Not because she applied for a job that she felt unqualified for. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't necessarily work like that. So.
And you have to draw a stark contrast from she was getting results and doing great work and yet getting passed up, to the shift was other people, both with them and through them, is where she actually found new opportunities. Like, it's got to be an extreme, very stark contrast, because you're challenging something that lots of us accept or just want to believe. Hey, like, and so what I want to see, another example of like getting more specific for the story is she was going up for the promotion, but then she was asked to train the person hired into that role. I didn't feel it. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to sense that she was working so hard. She skipped drinks with friends, or maybe she has a child and was like missing a ball game, or like, what I wanted to know 1 to 2 things that she was going through that are emblematic, and then let me feel. It's like the pizza example with Natalie's story, right? Of like the flour on the fingers. Always be thinking about the flour on the fingers. Like, the best writing advice is be more specific. It's not, I walked to the corner store. I walked to this old 7-Eleven where like the sign was crooked and there's always mice on the floor, and yet somehow people shop there. Like, that's more specific than the corner store. So bring me into the action. Just give me a few examples. It's the same with the community she talks to. What did they say? Who are they? What did they say? Did it happen exactly that way or verbatim? I don't know. Is it true? Yeah, it's true enough for you.
Yeah, and I think just to tack on to that, the emotion that she felt when she was passed up, and you could tie that back to this belief that you set up in the beginning of like, we were taught if you worked hard. So, I'm speaking for her, but she felt embarrassed because her whole life she's believed this one thing and then it was proving not to be true. Or she felt shame because she thought she had done the right things that she had been taught and it, didn't produce what she thought it was going to. So, and I think everyone can quickly relate to that, like, feeling in your chest of, oh no, like this isn't going the way that I thought it was going to go. And I feel embarrassed or I feel upset.
My question is, does it need the first setup? Like, could you just dive right into her story? Because it's it felt a little bit repetitive to, like, I think we could all see ourselves immediately in that story and still pick up all of those things that you said in the first setup. But I'm curious, like, just your thinking on setting it up that way.
To be honest, it's just the setup for the like whole thing, not for the story. So I was just kind of just reading the draft of the thing that I had. The actual story is just starting with Suma.
And you basically started writing an essay. Like, it could be a version of this that does start that way, or you could take each piece of the setup and just move it down into the Suma version, right? Like, the lie is this. Okay, just show me Suma experiencing the lie, right? She doesn't know it's a lie yet. You can use that as the outline. So I love that. I think it was a good note by Natalie as well. If this is going to be a standalone story, I'm riding with Suma from the jump. As we arrive at the end of our call, our final call in the series, I asked everyone for some reflection on this process. What stood out about trying to evolve from a very smart expert and practitioner in B2B to a more effective storyteller? What did they experience? And what would they recommend you understand as you embark on the same journey? So let's start with you, Natalie. What is one thing you're taking away from this experience? And what's one thing you might share with a peer who goes, any advice for me if I want to do something like that?
This has reminded me how much I used to love listening to podcasts like Radio Lab, This American Life, like all of that stuff. There was a period where I would listen to that for years and years, and I haven't in a long time. And I think it's just a good practice to surround yourself with great storytellers and really, really intuit and understand what they are observing and how they are reflecting back what is the information that they are receiving. So I think it's been a good way to be surrounded by that these last several weeks. Yeah, and I do want to practice that more and use that muscle more. I think the foundational work has been very challenging to get to that point where you're building the premise. Like, laying that foundation is hard. It's hard to figure out what you want to say and what your view of the world is as it relates to your company or your brand. But after that, it does get easier and everything else is clear. You've set yourself up for success. So surround yourself with good storytellers and be observant of how and why they are good storytellers, and then lay a really good foundation for your premise and understanding how you want to communicate your view of the world.
Simplicity is the result of much complexity, and stories are everything. The stories I tell my children to get them to eat their food or do whatever. Stories are just everything. And marketers, whether you're in marketing or not in marketing, if you are in trying to sell anything, stories are very important. So this has been a very valuable experience.
I think, like, as kind of busy professionals, business owners, like we don't get the time to do this kind of work. Like, and I forget how much time and how messy the process is, and to have it guided by someone who can give a framework, give a structure around that process, and get feedback from this incredible crew. Like, that is too rare, I think, in our like day-to-day working lives. So I would say, like, just try to make space for stuff like this. We all call ourselves creatives, but like, how much creative time do we actually get in a week? Almost none. It doesn't happen if you don't work. And we often also don't think of storytelling as something that we should be investing both time and dollars into, but we should be. It's the most important thing for our businesses.
Any parting words for people who are going through similar processes where they're trying to nail their positioning, they're trying to show up with greater ideas that serve their brand and serve their audience at the same time? What would you say to someone who is stuck producing, maybe generic basic how-tos or just describing what they do, and there's not that storytelling or creative power behind it? What would you tell them?
I think the thing that I'm most struck by today is just everyone's vulnerability and willingness to show up and try. I feel like it's been really inspiring for me to sit in this call and also been like, can I join the other ones? And I'm with y'all that I'm like, Jay, need to be hanging out with you more. I feel inspired by all of you to take this and what I've learned from you today and, take it into my work. And I think that there's something really amazing about being willing to show up and say, like, I know this isn't perfect, but this is me trying to adhere to a process and willingly taking feedback. And so I think that that's something, that we can all take into our work. And it feels very rudimentary, but again, Sarah, maybe you were saying this, but it's something that we don't do that often. It kind of like harkens back to being in college and having to present your papers and then getting feedback. But we get so busy in our day-to-day careers that we're not often doing this. So I would say keep trying is like the awkward, vulnerable thing to do. And then also, create those relationships where you feel comfortable getting creative feedback. And that's the only way that we're going to continue to learn and grow. So, yeah.
I appreciate that so much. The one phrase, well, there's several phrases, but I sign off lots of things that I write or share with the phrase, keep making what matters. Because I think it's so tempting for people, especially in B2B, but in any job, in any task, to start to diminish their own power to fit the mold of something, an industry, an organizational culture, a feed and the algorithm driving the feed, something that just makes your work harder, right? You become a commodity who can't compete on anything that helps you stand out, right? You diminish your power. And some of that is a personal human thing, because it does require you to turn inward and get in touch with how you and or your team and or your audience all feel about something and tap into that emotion. And some of that is a cultural thing or a schedule thing, right? Mm-hmm. And what this has made me realize is keep making what matters. I know there's a lot behind it. There's a lot I could say about that idea. But I think the thing that this experience has most brought to view for me or brought to light is meaningful things that matter to our businesses and our audiences need to go through lots of cycles, lots of reps, both in our minds and with others. And when we look at the creatives we admire that we're like, they're amazing, but we're in B2B and we could never, that's what they're doing. Sometimes publicly, sometimes behind the scenes. Their ideas for the book, for the speech, for the film, they're like micro moments, the jokes in a comedian's act or the beats of a story or a film or a podcast. These go through like the ringer. It's like this messy process where you actually find your best, and usually involves or at least benefits from having the right people around. I think marketers want to skip that messy part, but actually the messy part is what gives your work its power. It's in the mess that you find your best. And so that's what this experience has helped me realize most of all, is maybe we all need to embrace that a little bit more and stop trying to skip the mess, go around the mess, clean up the mess to just pop out gold, because that's not how it happens.